War doesn't just take lives, it buries secrets. Some secrets remain hidden for decades until one day the truth rises again. This is the story of a woman whose silence held an entire lifetime of love and loss. They called it the Skylark secret. In the Scottish Highlands during the dark years of World War II lived Flora Gordon. To her neighbors, she was just another young woman doing her part as the world tore itself apart. She worked, she smiled, she played her role in the rhythms of village life. But behind that quiet smile, Flora carried a secret she could never speak aloud, a secret that shaped not only her own life but the generations that followed. This story is not about generals or battlefields. It is about the silences women carried, the choices they made, and the quiet strength that outlasted war itself. Life in the Highlands during the Second World War was a strange mix of beauty and fear. On the surface, nothing seemed to change. The rolling green hills stretched endlessly toward the horizon. The loch still shimmered in the morning mist, and the songs of birds rose above the fields as if the world had remained untouched. To any traveler passing through, the Highlands might have looked like a place safe from the chaos raging across Europe. But for those who lived there, the war was everywhere. Soldiers patrolled the narrow roads, their boots echoing in quiet villages that had never seen so much military presence before. Army trucks rattled past stone cottages, raising clouds of dust. Air raid drills broke the stillness, forcing families to practice hurrying into shelters, though many wondered if these small defenses would ever protect them from real bombs. Food was rationed strictly. Every family received their little ration books, and each page carried the weight of survival. Butter, sugar, meat, all carefully counted. A birthday cake became a treasure, something so rare that people spoke of it for months afterward. Women learned to stretch meals, turning scraps into soups, grinding acorns for coffee, and making mock recipes that tasted little like the real thing. Everyone in the Highlands knew someone who had gone to fight. Sons, brothers, husbands, names spoken in past tense far too often. The emptiness left by these men was not just emotional, it was practical. Their absence meant that life had to go on without them, and women stepped into their roles. For young women like Flora Gordon, resilience was no longer a choice. It was a necessity. She knitted socks and scarves for soldiers, sending them away in parcels marked with love but also fear. She joined the Women's Voluntary Service, helping organize supplies and caring for evacuee children sent from bombed cities. She worked in the fields when help was short, her hands roughened by tasks that once belonged to men. To the outside world, Flora seemed steady, composed. She was the kind of daughter any parent would be proud of, the kind of neighbor others admired. She attended Sunday service, played the organ for the parish, and never once complained about shortages or sacrifice. If someone had asked about her life, she would have smiled politely and said she was fine. But behind the calm routines, the long queues at the ration shop, the evenings spent by the firelight, the village dances where gramophones played songs of faraway joy, something stirred quietly inside her, a secret longing that could not be spoken aloud, because Flora's heart was no longer her own. It belonged to a man she should never have loved. A soldier whose presence in the village was meant to be temporary, a name that should have been only one among many. Yet fate allowed their paths to cross, and that moment of chance changed everything. His name was Alec. Alec was unlike anyone Flora had ever met. He was a young soldier far from home, carrying the weight of war on his shoulders but still able to smile in a way that made the world feel lighter. Their first meeting was ordinary, almost accidental. A village gathering, music playing faintly, boots echoing on wooden floors. But when their eyes met across the crowded hall, something shifted. What began as stolen glances soon turned into quiet conversations. A walk home after a dance, a letter slipped discreetly into Flora's hand, words scribbled in haste yet filled with the kind of longing only war can create. Every meeting was a risk, every letter a lifeline. They knew they had little time, and so each moment became precious. For Flora, Alec represented hope in a world crumbling around her. He spoke of life beyond the war, of places he dreamed of seeing, of a future that felt impossible yet irresistibly close when he was near. For Alec, Flora was an anchor. In her presence, he could forget the battlefield, if only for a heartbeat, and imagine that peace was possible. But secrecy wrapped around them like a second skin. Their love could not be displayed in the open. Villages were small, tongues were sharp, and the war cast suspicion on every whisper. And beyond gossip, there were greater fears. Orders could come at any time. Alec might be sent away without warning, leaving Flora to carry her secret alone. Each encounter carried both joy and dread. At night, Flora lay awake replaying every word, every touch, knowing that tomorrow it could all be gone. Yet she could not stop herself from loving him. The heart rarely asks for permission, and in wartime, love often burned brighter because it was surrounded by darkness. Still, they both knew reality was closing in. The war pressed harder each day. Soldiers were lost. News from the front grew grimmer, and the village itself seemed to hold its breath. Flora clung to Alec's promises, and Alec clung to Flora's hope. But both understood what neither dared to say aloud. Love in wartime was fragile, and fate was merciless. Their love was a flame flickering against the storm, precious and bright, but in constant danger of being snuffed out. War has a cruel way of reminding people that happiness is temporary. For Flora and Alec, the illusion of stolen moments could not last forever. The telegram came quickly, a sharp command wrapped in official language. Alec's unit was being moved closer to the front, where the fighting grew more desperate by the day. The kind of posting from which men rarely returned. The night before his departure, they met in secret one final time. The village hall stood dark, its windows boarded, dust clinging to its once polished floorboards. But in one corner, hidden from watchful eyes, Flora and Alec found each other. The silence was thick, broken only by the sound of their breaths. Alec reached into his jacket and pressed a folded letter into Flora's hands. His voice was steady, though his eyes betrayed the fear he could not show. "If I don't come back," he whispered, "promise me you'll live. Promise me you won't let this war take more than it already has." Flora's heart clenched. She wanted to believe his words, to cling to the hope that he would return, that this was just another posting. But the look in his eyes told her the truth. Soldiers leaving for the front did not often come home. She held him tightly, as though her embrace alone might alter fate. In that moment, time seemed to stand still. No bombs, no rationing, no fear of tomorrow, and only two young hearts desperate to hold on. When they parted, it was with words left unsaid, tears swallowed in the dark. Days turned into weeks. Each morning, Flora scanned the newspaper, praying for Alec's name in the list of survivors. Each evening, she stood by the post office waiting for a letter that never came. The silence grew heavier with each passing day, and in the stillness of that silence, dread settled in her bones. Then the news arrived. Alec's unit had been caught in brutal fighting. There were survivors, but Alec's name was not among them. The rumors moved through the village like a cold wind, whispered behind closed doors, murmured at the shop counter. To the world, he was just another casualty, one of the thousands swallowed by a war that devoured men daily. But to Flora, he was everything. Her love, her hope, her future, gone in an instant. Grief threatened to consume her, but grief alone was not her burden. Worse still was the secret she now carried. She was not only mourning Alec, she was protecting the memory of their love, a love no one else could know about. If she confessed, there would be questions, judgment, condemnation. A young woman's reputation in a small Highland village was fragile. One whisper could destroy her. So she built a wall of silence. To the world, she was composed, dutiful Flora. To herself, she was a woman shattered, carrying a bond she could never speak of. But silence is heavy. It pressed against her chest every day. She smiled when expected. She worked when duty called. She played the organ at church, her hands steady even as her heart broke. But in the quiet hours of the night, when the house was dark and no one could see, tears flowed freely for a love she could never claim. It was in those nights that she began to notice the skylark. Its fragile song pierced the stillness high and clear, as if daring the storm to silence it. To Flora, the bird was no longer just part of the landscape. It became her voice, fragile, small, yet fierce enough to be heard above the silence. The breaking point had come and gone. Alec was gone. But Flora's secret remained, shaping the course of her life, whispering in every quiet moment she carried for decades. Flora's life after Alec was a life of quiet endurance. Outwardly, she seemed unchanged. A young woman who smiled politely at the grocer, who nodded in church, who went about her duties like everyone else. But inside, She was carrying a weight that no one could see. Her love for Alec and the pain of losing him lived inside her like a shadow that never left. Every time she passed the old hall where they had once danced, her heart ached. Each letter tucked away in her trunk was both a treasure and a wound. But she never spoke of him, not to her family, not to her closest friends. In those days, silence was expected. Women were praised for being strong, for not showing too much emotion, for keeping their heads high even when their hearts were breaking. To admit to a secret love, especially one tied to a soldier who never returned, would have raised questions she could not bear to answer. The village was small. Gossip traveled fast, and so Flora built walls around her heart, protecting her secret from the world. But silence is not the same as peace. Each day she carried her grief like an invisible burden. She worked, she laughed when she had to. She played her role. Yet in the quiet moments and when the house was still, when night fell over the highlands, the weight of her silence pressed hardest. It was during those nights that Flora found an unlikely companion, the Skylark. She would hear its song drifting over the hills, rising even when storms threatened. The bird was small, fragile, yet its voice filled the air with courage. To Flora, the Skylark was more than a bird, and it was a symbol. Its song reminded her that even when her own voice was trapped inside, life could still endure. The Skylark became her secret comfort, the echo of everything she could not say aloud. Each note was like Alec's memory returning to her, reminding her that love, once given, does not vanish. Though she lived in silence, she was never entirely voiceless. The Skylark sang for her, carrying her hidden truth into the open air. And so, year after year, Flora carried on. To the outside world, she was steady and composed. But within her, silence had become both a prison and a shield, protecting her secret yet reminding her of everything she had lost. Decades passed. The war ended, the world changed, and the highlands grew quieter. Children grew up, families moved on. But Flora never spoke of her secret. Time buried many things, yet the silence remained. Then came Lexi, Flora's daughter. She had grown up sensing there was something unsaid, a shadow in her mother's eyes, a sadness behind her smiles. Flora had always been a loving mother, but there were moments when her gaze seemed far away, lost in another time. When Flora passed away, Lexi returned to the highland village of her childhood. She came not just as a daughter grieving her mother, but as a woman searching for truth. Why had her mother left the village once before? Why did she never talk about her youth? Why did her life always feel wrapped in silence? Walking through the old streets, Lexi felt echoes of the past. The stone cottages, the churchyard, the fields, all carried traces of stories she had never been told. Villagers spoke kindly of her mother, calling her strong, graceful, and proud. But Lexi knew there had been more, something hidden beneath the surface. Her search led her to an old trunk in her mother's room. Inside, she found letters worn and faded with time. The ink had smudged, but the words were clear enough to reveal the truth. Alec. The soldier her mother had loved. The man she had never spoken of. Each letter was a window into a part of Flora's soul that Lexi had never known. She read about dances under dim lights, whispered promises, and the fear of war that lingered behind every smile. She discovered the love her mother had once fought to protect, a love that shaped her life in silence. For Lexi, the letters were both heartbreaking and healing. They explained so much: her mother's quietness, her distant looks, her unspoken sadness. At last, the silence had a voice. Standing in the village fields, listening to the Skylark's song, Lexi understood. The bird her mother cherished had been more than a sound of nature. It had been her symbol of survival, of love unbroken even by time and war. Through Alec's memory and Flora's silence, Lexi discovered not just her mother's secret, but her mother's strength. As Lexi held the faded letters in her hands, she stepped outside into the open fields of the highlands. The air was crisp, the hills quiet, and above her, the Skylark began to sing. That sound, high, fragile, yet fearless, was the same sound her mother had once listened to every evening. For Flora, it had been a reminder that life, even when broken by war, could still rise and sing again. Lexi closed her eyes and felt her mother's presence in that song. Suddenly, the silence that had surrounded Flora all her life was no longer empty. It was full of meaning. It wasn't a silence of weakness, but of strength. Flora had carried her secret not out of shame, but out of love. a love too deep to explain, too painful to share, yet powerful enough to shape the lives of those who came after her. The Skylark's voice seemed to carry Alec's memory across the years. Lexi imagined her mother standing in this same field, listening to the bird's song, holding Alec in her heart, even when the world had taken him away. The bird's song became her mother's voice, a voice that had survived when words could not. For Lexi, the discovery was both heartbreaking and beautiful. She realized that the love story between Flora and Alec had never truly ended. It had lived on in silence, in sacrifice, in the Skylark's cry. And now, through the letters, through the truth finally uncovered, it could live on again, no longer hidden, no longer buried. As the sun dipped low behind the hills, Lexi whispered a promise to her mother. "Your silence will not be forgotten. Your story will be told." The Skylark soared higher, its song growing louder as if answering back. In that moment, Lexi felt the past and present joined together. Flora's secret was no longer a burden, it was a legacy. The war had stolen many lives, many voices, many futures, but it had not stolen love. And as long as the Skylark continued to sing, Flora's story, and the love she carried, would never fade. When Lexi finally pieced together her mother's story, it felt as though she had unlocked a door that had been sealed for decades. Behind that door was not just pain, but an entire world of love, sacrifice, and resilience. Flora had lived her whole life in silence, not because she was weak, but because she was strong. She understood that sometimes the bravest thing you can do is carry a burden without letting the world see you break. Her silence was not emptiness, it was a shield, a way to protect those she loved from the sorrow that had shaped her. And now, standing in the same highland fields where Flora once walked, Lexi realized the true meaning of her mother's life. It was not defined by tragedy but by endurance. The secret she had carried was not one of shame but of love. Love for Alec, love for her family, love for a future she would never see but still hoped for. The Skylark's song, echoing over the quiet hills, was more than just a bird's call. It was a symbol, fragile, small, easily drowned out, yet still rising against the storm, just like Flora, just like so many women whose stories remain untold. War writes many names into history books, kings, generals, battles, dates, but it often forgets the quiet stories, the women who waited, who worked, who loved in silence. Flora's life was one of those stories. To her neighbors, she was simply a wife, a mother, a woman who lived quietly in a village. But beneath that surface, she was a survivor of a love tested by war and time. Lexi understood that her mother's silence was never meant to erase Alec. It was meant to honor him, to keep his memory alive in the only way she knew how. Every smile she forced, every chore she completed, every polite conversation she endured, all of it was her way of carrying forward, of refusing to let war claim the last piece of her heart. And now, by discovering the letters, Lexi could finally give her mother the voice she never used. She could tell the world, Flora loved, Flora lost, and Flora endured. Her silence had been her strength, but her story deserved to be heard. For the audience, this is not just a tale about one woman in one Highland village. It is a reminder that history is filled with hidden heroines, women whose courage did not always make headlines, but whose sacrifices shaped families, communities, and futures. The Skylark's secret is more than just Flora's story. It is the story of resilience itself. It is about how love can survive even when separated by war. It is about how silence can carry meaning deeper than words. And it is about how the smallest of symbols, a bird's fragile song, can become the echo of a life lived with quiet bravery. As Lexi walked away from the field, she no longer felt burdened by questions. She felt connected to her mother, to Alec, and to the truth that had been buried for so long. The silence had finally been broken, and in its place came understanding, healing, and peace. And that is the legacy Flora left behind. Not one of sorrow, but one of love strong enough to survive both war and time. And just like Lexi, we too can uncover these hidden voices. Because for every Flora, there are countless women whose stories still wait in silence. This is just the beginning of our journey into silent heroines of World War II. If Flora's story touched you, subscribe and join us as we bring to life more forgotten tales of courage, sacrifice, and love.